The shooting in Ottawa appears to be the latest in a series of terror attacks carried out by so-called lone wolves, men or women who appear to be inspired by terrorist ideology, although there's no conclusive evidence yet that he was in fact a lone wolf. They're still investigating. Only days before Wednesday's attack, another Canadian soldier was killed in a separate incident, a hit and run near Montreal. Canadian authorities say the attacker had been radicalized, classified as a potential important threat. That according to Canadian authorities. Let's bring in David Gartenstein-Ross. He's a senior fellow with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies in Washington. David, has this lone wolf phenomenon increased in the past few years, or is it sort of remained steady?
It's hard to quantify. There's not evidence that it's had a massive spike. In Canada, you've had more fatalities now due to lone wolf attacks than you used to have, quite obviously. Canada really isn't used to a lot of fatalities through terrorism. It's had a few incidents, but really it's been decades since they've experienced something like this. But in the United States, you do have lone wolf attacks. You've had fatalities caused by that, but you've also had a lot of periods, 1970s and 1980s, of people doing similar things. Abortion clinic bombings are one good example.
We know that lone wolf, some people think it's a misnomer. This suspect, we're now told, did have at least some connections with other jihadists in Canada. So would that rule out this lone wolf theory?
No, when we talk about lone wolves, we talk about the execution of the attack, not the radicalization. It's very unusual for people to be entirely self-radicalized. Usually someone leads them along, although not always. So he could be radicalized by others and probably was, but would still be a lone wolf attacker.
What's the main lesson that U.S. law enforcement, counterterrorism authorities need to learn from what happened in Canada?
One thing that I admire about the Canadian response, it was a very measured response. The media didn't freak out about this, and law enforcement also had a measured response. I think that what the Canadians are going to do from here is going to be very similar to what the U.S. would do, tracking down the network, seeing if other people were involved. Similarly, in the United States, I think that there's one thing that would have happened differently. That is, this first attack that was carried out, the shooting, it was near the Parliament building, yet the shooter was still able to get into the Parliament building. I think if that were to happen in the United States, he never would have been able to get into the Capitol. So that at least is one thing where the U.S. in its current system has an advantage over the Canadian response.
You've done some significant research on why some of these young men are impressed by these terrorist videos. ISIS has got some pretty sophisticated videos out there on the internet. What makes them so vulnerable to this brand of terrorism, shall we say?
I think there's different pathways. That's what most research concludes. On the one hand, there's an ideological pathway where people, through sincere religious conviction, reach very extreme results. There are some pathways that are much more angry, based on sense of grievance. Some are based on sense of adventure. Some are even based around sex. For example, you can see those Colorado schoolgirls who wanted to go over and marry ISIS fighters. Part of that feeds into some of their notions of what ISIS fighters were, what kind of society that would be. But in a number of cases, particularly with ISIS, they tend to focus much more on the young and angry demographic, much more so than Al-Qaeda does. Right now, we can see how these beheadings and people taking selfies with severed heads is attracting people to the battlefield. I think that actually, over the longer term, this is going to end up causing real brand damage to ISIS. But right now, we're in the phase where young people are really excited by this.
All right, thanks very much, David Gartenstein-Ross from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies.